some names and faces, or names anyway, that we haven't seen before. So maybe if I could just get a sense from Claire and Linda and Sean and Sherry, just tell me, maybe just say hi and tell me what kind of organization you're with, so I can maybe tailor the questions or the answers a little bit in my stories.
Hi, this is Claire Garmirian. I'm with Save the Children, the nonprofit, and one of the things I'm really intrigued about is looking at kind of VIP or celebrity relationships who are then spokespeople for us. So it's kind of a double relationship there.
Very good. Yes, I have stories I can tell about that one.
Fantastic.
Linda? Anybody else? Sean? Sherry? Not required. Just figure that if you've got a particular issue. There we go. Oh, good. Okay, we've got somebody from Alaska. Excellent. I'm dying to talk about Alaska. My cousins live there, and it's one of my favorite places. Okay, so we'll get started, and like I said, I do have 30 years of measuring relationships under my belt now. So if there's a particular issue or a particular application, as Claire mentioned, don't hesitate to bring it up. Just need to do this. There we go. So the reason for just get rid of all of these. The reason why relationships are important actually stems a little bit from a book that Bob Garfield wrote a few years ago called "You Can't Buy Me Like," which is just a wonderful set of instructions, basically, on how to operate in what he calls the relationship era. And if you don't know Bob Garfield, he's the host of On the Media on NPR on the weekends, but he also spent most of his life talking about advertising, paid media. And he's pretty convinced that the idea of, buying relationships and buying likes is a complete total waste of time, and that the way things are now, it really is about the connections. Even if it's an online connection, all the research shows that the reason why people like, for example, Save the Children or any particular organization has less to do with the nature of the organization and more to do with the person who has suggested to them that they like it. So if I like Erin and Erin likes me and I send something to Erin, she's much more likely to share that or endorse it in some way, shape, or form, regardless of what it's about, but because there's a relationship there. So what we're trying to do is today we're going to talk a little bit about putting some numbers around relationships. And this is one of the Rob Coddington cartoons from our book on measuring the network nonprofit. And it's actually my favorite one because I just think that I have this vision of, walking to the altar and having somebody say on a scale of 1 to 5, how do you feel? Is my microphone muted? Are you suggesting this? Let me turn off the, nope. Oh, that could be. Okay. So relationships actually have been studied, and I don't know how many of you have studied Jim Brunig or Linda Hahn or any of the number of academics that have written and studied relationships over the years. But about 20 years ago, Jim Brunig and Linda Hahn defined aspects, and the massive amount of research behind this, but defined basically the following aspects that comprise a good relationship. The first one is probably the hardest one to understand, which is control mutuality. Not the hardest, but control mutuality means that a good relationship has to have people on both sides of the relationship have to have an assumption of equal levels of control. So neither one is necessarily dominant in the relationship. Obviously, trust is a component of relationships, satisfaction with the relationship, commitment to the relationship. And then there are these two other things. One is exchange and communal. Now, exchange is a relationship. If you go to the grocery store and buy a pack of gum and you hand the teller a, $5 bill and she gives you change in the gum, that is purely an exchange relationship. You don't have any more depth of a relationship than that. So when you offer somebody, for example, I'm going to give you something, a discount coupon or whatever if you sign up for my newsletter. That is an exchange relationship. Yes, it is one that is commitment for a minute or so until they decide whether or not they like what you send them in a newsletter. But that is driven by the sort of commercial nature. A communal relationship is one in which each party wants to make the other succeed. Back in the days when I used to work for Hewlett-Packard, one of the HP Way tenets was we will succeed by making our customers succeed, and that's the epitome of a communal relationship. And I think a lot of times when we're thinking about relationships in today's social media world, we kind of forget that. We get wrapped up in other aspects, and I think we sort of have to remember that in order to have a good relationship, each side has to want the other one to succeed. So what Grunig did, and Hahn and stuff, they came up with about 75 questions, and actually they're in the back of my books. They're on they're on the website if you want all of them. Other than a very few number of people, nobody's actually asked anybody all 75 questions, and I don't expect you to. But what I've done is I've sort of pulled out the most commonly used statements. And they're statements, they're not questions. And the idea is that you ask people on a scale of 1 to 7, to what extent do they agree with a statement, and the statement to test, and these statements have been tested over and over again. So it's a very reliable index. So you would ask them, in dealing with people like me, this organization has tendency to throw its weight around. So if people agree with that, obviously there's no control mutuality. They feel like you're in control, and that's an area that might need to be fixed. Or this organization really listens to what people like me have to say. Trust, this organization can be relied upon to keep its promises. And another important part of trust is sort of credibility and the ability to accomplish what you say you're going to do. There's more statements for trust in all of these, and I'm happy to share them with everybody later. But I sort of want to get the idea of these are, it essentially becomes a 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 question survey. And you could cut it down even farther if you needed to. But it's basically a survey that is already written. You don't have to pay anything for it. All of these statements are there. You might want to tweak them a little bit. But many, many, many organizations use these statements to test the strength and health of their relationships. And as you can see, things like satisfaction, generally speaking, I'm pleased with the relationship, or people enjoy dealing with this organization. Commitment, it has to do with a long-lasting bond. And then exchange is sort of these negative things. Even though people like me have had a relationship with this organization for a long time, it still expects something in return. That something in return concept that is the essence of an exchange relationship. And you hope that they disagree with that statement. And then communal is they understand that this organization is very concerned about the welfare of people like me, or I think that this organization succeeds by stepping on other people. And as I said, pick and choose your questions, but basically the idea is that at the start of a campaign, at the start of the year, at the start of a benchmark, whatever you want to do, you basically ask those questions of your target audience. And obviously, you've got to ask it of people who do have some kind of a relationship with you, because if you just ask it of total strangers, they're not going to know you. You sort of have to get to the relationship stage and past the simple awareness stage. So you do a benchmark, you implement a program of some sort, you do a follow-up, you look at what has changed. It's no different than any other measurement program, and essentially it's not that complicated. What is complicated is teasing out the reasons for things and the implications, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. First thing is you really do need to understand the stakeholders. So it's not just, you know, people who give me money, whether it's a charity or selling something. It's all of those other people out there that you need to have a good relationship. The people who recommend your product or who pass along your request for donations. Who are these specific people? And, you know, I keep saying it's not everybody with a pulse. It's got to be those people that influence your future. And it's probably employees, it's probably partners, customers, investors, prospective customers, influencers on those customers. Many of us deal with legislators or regulatory bodies, lobbyists. There's all of these different groups. Now, I'm not suggesting that you have to do 9 different surveys. You need to prioritize whose relationship is most important to you, who makes the biggest difference. And basically, it's just really a question of, okay, if you had to prioritize, you know, 8 or 9 different audiences, you can probably survey the top 2 for starters. And if you find that that's useful, then you can expand it. But I went into years and years and years ago when I did my very first study like this. I went into Habitat for Humanity, and they had literally 22 different stakeholder groups, and I gave everybody dots from like little sticky dots. So there's $1 million in each one of those, and vote. And very quickly we narrowed it down to about 5. So you do need to get people to understand what their priorities are. So this is what we actually put this in SurveyMonkey. I do it a lot in SurveyMonkey. Basically, the statements from the Grunig Relationships survey. And as I said, there's 75 of them. You need to go through and pick out the ones that are most relevant to you. Many of them are geared around the idea of commerce. So Save the Children might not necessarily pick those. On the other hand, you need to probably pick 1 from each of the 6 relationship categories, if not 2. So let's talk a little bit about how you actually administer the survey. You get free tools like SurveyMonkey and Google Forms. You get more expensive and more sophisticated survey vendors like Qualtrics and Benchpoint. And they're very good because they can really help you through the process. Both SurveyMonkey and Surveyta are my 2 kind of go-to sources, especially for low-budget programs. SurveyMonkey, I pay, I don't know, something every month. Surveyta is more interesting because Surveyta, and it's not on this list because they charge you by the respondent. If you can get somehow your survey down to 6 questions, it is $1 per respondent. So if you want to survey 500 people, that's $500. And that includes a screening question to make sure that the people that they're asking this of are the right people. Now, if you've ever tried to access premium content, you've probably seen a pop-up survey that says, we'll give you this content if you fill out this survey. That's the people behind it, not necessarily Surveyta, but it probably is. So, you start out with a very broad general interest population. I just did a survey, benchmark survey for a premature birth organization, charitable organization, and literally the budget was $500. We did 250 surveys before. We'll do 250 surveys after the event to see. We had to, limit the number of questions to 6. Survey the charges for Survey go up, but not much beyond that. If you have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 questions, you need to call them and get an estimate. But it's still a very affordable way of doing it, and I have to say I've had great results from it. So, and that's SURVATA, and I just didn't put it on here because I was thinking the 6 questions, but I've now had experience going beyond that. So then you're going to get this data back, and hopefully you've gotten enough data back so that you can do some crosstabs. When I say crosstabs are key, it's the only way you're going to get any insight out of your data. And I'll give the example of a relationship survey that I did many years ago, actually, but essentially the overall results were very good. It showed that everybody has a decent relationship, and this happened to be a water authority, a government, basically a utility company. And it said that pretty much everybody had a slightly above average relationship. When we segmented the data, we found that the relationship was much better with women than with men. We also found that among one of their target audiences was the media, and the media had a terrible, they thought it was all exchange and they were all those negative stuffs in there. So you need to be able to cross-tab by, certainly, if nothing else, by gender, location, age, maybe education, and maybe job function or business or something along those lines, because that's how you're going to get the aha moment. Because just looking at an average, especially the first time for your benchmark survey, an average isn't going to tell you anything because you don't know, you have nothing to compare it to. So you're going to dig into that and say, okay, let's compare gender, let's compare college level, let's compare age, and see where there are some differences. I use Excel. I dump all the survey data from SurveyMonkey or Surveyed or any of that stuff. I just put it in Excel and use pivot tables sometimes to dig down into it. There's some other tools out there, Data Cracker, SPSS, and SAS, so there's other ways of doing it, but I would strongly recommend just, if you don't understand how to make pivot tables in Excel and you need a little bit more advice along those lines, get in touch. I'm about to do a little video on how to create pivot tables. The most important thing is to create actionable conclusions, right? So it's not enough to just say we have a, on a scale of 1 to 7, we have a 7.8 score, index score, or whatever. You need to be able to say why and what you're going to do about it. And I'm going to give you some examples. And then the most important thing is, if you do it once, you've got to do it again. It should be, ideally, you would do it at least twice a year, if not, the more often you can do it, the better progress you can say. I would not recommend doing it any more than once a quarter, but certainly if you can do it once a quarter or twice a year, you'll be able to see progress over time. For an event, you're going to do pre-post, before you do anything, before you start promoting the event, and then something afterwards. Most events that I work with, the purpose of the event is to raise awareness of either a specific mission or a specific message or a specific issue, and you basically measure what the understanding of is beforehand. If the event is designed to expand relationships into new areas, you're going to have to make sure that those new stakeholders are surveyed. Ongoing, most employee surveys I know are done annually or biannually. More and more organizations are shifting to quarterly so they can understand whether their employee relationships are changing quarter by quarter as events move much more quickly than they used to. So my favorite, one of my favorite relationship studies was a study done for ASPCA, and what we were trying to find was, to what extent what was the health of their relationship with the general public as well as with their actual mailing list, their donors and subscribers, and like that. And again, this is a typical crosstab where we looked at 4 different elements of the relationship: keeps promises, values this relationship, pleased with this relationship, enjoys dealing with this organization. And what we looked at was, where was the relationship strongest? This was on a scale of 1 to 5, so it was 3.99 on a scale of 1 to 5. And so we identified, obviously, Mid-Atlantic, East, South, Central, West, South, Central were areas, and we could then go back in, because we had done a media analysis, we could see where media showed up, what kind of discussion was going on about this organization in those specific areas, and we could figure out why the results were slightly better in Mid-Atlantic than they were in West North Central, for example. Then we looked at how these same people felt about getting involved in the organization, whether it's by donating money, becoming a registered member online, adopting a pet, or becoming a volunteer, or buying branded purchases for your pet. And interestingly enough, we found that while the scores weren't that high, they were stronger in the areas where the relationships were better, indicating obviously that it would make sense to work on improving relationships as a pathway to increased engagement from their volunteers and their supporters. This is another interesting case study, actually. This is of a celebrity, and Claire, this is not exactly what you want to know, but what we wanted to find out for this particular celebrity was, he does a lot. He gets involved in a number of different causes, and what he wanted to know was which of those causes caused people to trust him more. And so what we looked at were the various aspects of relationship. You can see them at the top: commitment, communal, exchange, satisfaction, and trust. Control mutuality we dropped because it just was not something that was being, this is all in social media, by the way, and it just wasn't something that was coming across in social media, and it wasn't something that you could code for. But we developed a coding instrument to find and identify social media conversations that express commitment to this particular celebrity, to whether the communal concept was being expressed, exchange, satisfaction with a relationship, or trust. Now, the first thing you'll notice is there was a lot of communal stuff, and that's the nature of this particular guy. He does a lot, he gives a lot, he's very, very generous, and he gets very involved in various causes. We then looked at the nature of the conversations and what in that case was driving trust, and things like giving a heads up on things that he was doing, and distributing media, videos and other things, pictures that he had taken. Those were very instrumental in increasing trust, interestingly enough. Trust being that orange thing over to the side. As you can see, the communal aspects of a relationship were talked about continuously through everything. But trust was really mostly communicated in those two, giving a heads up and distributing media. And we looked at over time all the various things that he did, And, again, we're able to identify, in the wake of Hurricane Sandy, people basically expressed trust in his, philanthropy and the fact that he was just doing things for a good reason. So this is a way to measure trust as expressed in social media over time. And that's it. And that concludes the first half of the presentation. And now we'll open it up for questions.
Also, Katie, Linda actually was trying to introduce herself earlier. But no. But I just wanted to introduce her to everyone, and just wanted to pass along that she says she is interested in measuring community outreach efforts in relationships and influencers at the community level, and she works in Dallas.
Right. Well, let me address Claire's thing first, because I do have an interesting story about that, and I can probably pull it up, but it's probably just an easy story. I was working with UNICEF, which interestingly enough does consider Save the Children, I think, as a key benchmark. But when I was working with them, this was specifically around social media engagement, and what we were looking for was initially which celebrities, what did the celebrity relationship stuff do in terms of social media engagement? And what we found was that it was huge. That frankly, all of the high-level engagement, shares and comments and all that stuff, most of that was driven by celebrities. But then we looked at it and said, well, wait a minute. All engagement isn't created equal. Because there's the, happy birthday Serena Williams level of engagement, which really doesn't do much for UNICEF. And then there's the back and forth commentary from people who would say, oh my God, terrible things are happening, thank you for sharing UNICEF, I'm going to go to Africa and adopt a baby girl. And responders would say, don't do that, trust UNICEF, support them, give money, whatever. But that won't help. Trust UNICEF, they know what they're doing, they're the experts. So we further analyzed these high quality levels of engagement and found that while there weren't as many of them, they were very, very focused around Mia Farrow, who had gone to Africa. We were tracking the conversation around that particular trip. And even though she only had 40,000 followers, she got a very, very high percentage of very high level of engagement. On the other hand, they also had David Beckham and used him for some announcement of some sort. Huge level of engagement, but it was very low level. The conclusion at the time was that if you have a complicated message you're trying to get across, you go for somebody who's got fewer followers but they're a more engaged following. If you have something new to say, you go to somebody like David Beckham, where really people are following him because they're interested in football, not because necessarily they're interested in UNICEF, but it's a good way of getting the word out. The other thing that we also showed, interestingly enough, was that celebrity relationships were far more cost-effective, actually, in terms of cost per engagement and things like that, than many of the other, things that they were doing out there. Because as much as they took time, there wasn't a whole lot of cash outlay in this case for some of these relationships, and they were very strong, and not equally strong. Obviously, they have many celebrity endorsers, and some of them are or have better relationships than others, but using celebrity relationships very strategically relative to the goals of the program or the goals of the campaign was effective.
Great, thank you. Could I ask as a follow-up,
Yes.
were you just manually combing through comments and comment streams?
Yes,
Okay.
back in the day. That was back in the day. But frankly, random sampling works beautifully. Yes, we actually read 3,000 comments for this particular thing. But since then, I've done a lot of this, and what we do is we random sample either by week or by media outlet, or we try to get to a small enough group of key blogs or key influencers that really matter and just read that. But yes, when you're looking for key messages, it's pretty hard to automate that. And for the celebrity one that we did, that has to be manually read. When you're looking for things like trust and commitment and satisfaction, you can't teach a computer. We tried, didn't work. Can't teach a computer how to judge commitment and satisfaction and exchange and those things.
Great, thank you.
All right. Does anyone else have any questions they want to ask at this time? If not, I have a question that somebody emailed in, so why don't we skip to that? And all right, Katie, someone had the question of how is the impact of people using emojis, whether it's on an iPhone or Facebook, how is that impacting the measurement of relationships?
Very good question. Basically, there are some organizations out there, some vendors that are now incorporating emoji measurement in their automated analysis. I haven't seen it, and I don't know how good it is. I do know that it is an expression of feelings, of emotions. So if you're analyzing stuff manually, you can absolutely just record that. One of the things that we used, and you can see this actually in let me shrink this a little bit. This is back here. In this study, when you say the top 10 types of conversations by relationship concepts, well, you could certainly have an emoji category for a type of conversation. We had actually, this a number of years ago, we had actually identified 27 different types of social media conversations that can take place. And they're mutually exclusive, and it's an amazing list. But these are the ones that most often showed up. Absolutely, you could put emojis in there. I haven't done it. I don't know anybody who is, but I do know that that's going to be a big one because, to a large extent, other than smiley faces, nobody was really paying much attention. But now, especially as Facebook really expands this concept and makes it easier, it's going to tell you how people are feeling towards the post, the comment, that individual thing. It doesn't necessarily tell you how they feel about the whole organization. Is there a emoji for trust or satisfaction? I assume that there probably is. In which case it would make measurement of trust and satisfaction much easier. I doubt that there's enough subtlety in emojis to convey communal and exchange relationships, and control mutuality. But there's no reason why you couldn't invent one and use it. I just think that people people are expressing themselves in emojis, just not necessarily expressing their feelings towards a relationship. They're going to be expressing feelings towards the towards the comment or the post. And that's an important distinction.
Great. Is anyone who's on the call right now, does anyone have a question? Oh, wait, it looks like somebody just typed one into the chat, and it is from Phil Backlar, and he is wondering, Katie, if you know about, hold on, I'm clicking on this hyperlink he sent. I could be pronouncing this wrong, Nico. He included the link in the chat box, but it's basically about mood data, and it claims that it has powerful analytics which enable your team to know how everyone is feeling, which creates an open, honest, positive environment for peak performance.
Interesting. No, I have not heard of it. But here's the cultural sensitivity piece, which is there's a wonderful singer-songwriter called Cozy Sheridan who writes a very, very funny song about how her ancestors were not the sort that emoted in public. And I always think about that. I mean, it's very, very, expressing emotions and stuff like that is very cultural. And I think you have to be sensitive. You can't assume that everybody's going to be comfortable, and I think it remains to be seen how much people are going to express themselves. Certainly, New England Puritan descendants like myself are not prone to express themselves very much. On the other hand, obviously, millennials and younger people are much more prone to do so. So I think, you're going to have to layer on top of any analysis of this the cultural differences that you're gonna see. In other words, if you take a population of employees and you want to see how everybody's feeling, you can't say, oh my God, everybody hates us simply because they're not expressing stuff. It may well be that they're not expressing stuff simply because it's not in their culture or their nature to do so. So I think we're really getting into, the whole piece of relationship measurement and where it's going is really delving into psychology and sociology. And I think Philip, I'm actually very curious to see, if there's any overlap or any cross cultivation, I guess, with your sociology or psychology departments, because what I'm seeing more and more as social becomes more important is that it's really sort of cultural anthropology, not so much relationship measurement. Do you have a thought on that?
We, as the Internet of Things comes along, and I read an article recently about biometric tags in employee situations. It's measuring all kinds of body things about where you are and who you're talking to and how you're feeling, at least as far as the biometrics go. Right, it's this huge amount of the big data thing, like I forget who it was from Pennsylvania, talked about data science.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, Marcia DeStazo.
Yeah, Marcia DeStazo. That's a big deal, right? So everybody wants a piece of that pie. The sociologists and the marketers, and from our perspective at our program, that we teach, we're kind of a Grunig program, so we keep coming back to the question of long-term relationship and social capital instead of just economic transactions. So that's kind of where we're at with it.
Yeah, I totally. I think also the interesting thing is that with the ability to make transactions this much faster, we haven't really factored that in.
Yeah, it's hard to know who we're involving because there's so much to do. I know our university is having a data symposium over break to try to get people together to interdisciplinary to look at this stuff.
Great.
Yeah.
Write a story for the Measurement Advisor.
Okay.
All right.
Question?
Questions? Don't be shy. We all like measurement, and we all have varying levels of expertise, but you're speaking to Katie, who's the queen, so have at it.
Sean, do you have a specific measurement issue up there in Alaska?
Sean says, I don't, as we haven't measured at all.
Well, the important thing about utilities is that you really do need to measure, since you're not, I'm assuming you're not selling stuff, you're somewhat regulated, and when you're a regulated utility, you really are dependent upon the goodwill of your customers. And there's so many stories out there of what happens if you don't. And actually, a good one is during the ice storm, I think of 2009 here, when everybody in the Northeast lost power, and the leading utility in the state, which is now Eversource, but at the time it was Public Service Company of New Hampshire, had a terrible relationship. Everybody hated it. It was easy to hate. They were very powerful, very much, control unmutuality, imposing things on people and kind of buying their way through the local legislature and stuff. And nobody liked them. And Unitil was this tiny little utility in Exeter that had a very charismatic CEO and was just wonderful, and everybody loved them. So when everybody lost power, everybody was furious, everybody complained. About 6 months later, the legislature convened an investigation, of course, and slapped PSNH on the wrist and didn't say anything to Unitil because they hadn't had as many complaints, but everybody complained about PSNH. PSNH took that to heart, jumped into social media in a huge way, put a very large number of people on Twitter to respond. In the next major storm that took power out for another week, they were unbelievably responsive, and they would say, our truck is heading your way, or and people were exchanging information using the hashtag and the @PSNH Twitter handle. Everybody was much more informed, and even though the power was off for the same amount of time, people would run out and give coffee to the PSNH people, which was unheard of in my lifetime. Unitil did nothing, and Unitil still wasn't on social media. And what happened was that 6 months after that, PSNH, no investigation, Unitil got investigated. And so it was really that PSNH had used Twitter mostly to develop relationships, to nurture relationships with the customers, and the customers didn't complain, so the Public Utility Commission didn't investigate. How do you put a value on that? Count out the amount of hours that the lawyers charge you to go stand in front of the Public Utilities Commission, and you'll find that it was a pretty worthwhile thing. And they've kept that up to this day. When we lose power here, the first thing I do is go on Twitter, and I generally get an answer.
And also, just to follow up, Katie, Sean says that there actually is measurement on their products and employee satisfaction, but not on the public relations and their sponsorship programs.
So interestingly enough, actually, another regulated utility in New Hampshire, they actually years ago started doing I want to say twice a year, using the Grunig relationship. It was very funny because I opened up this survey because I'm a customer and I'm looking at this thing and I'm like, oh, isn't that interesting? Those are the Grunig questions. Turns out that the guy who put it out there had studied Grunig and at Syracuse. But anyway, I mean, that they used that, and it was very interesting because you could see over a period of time using that data to improve their relationships, because all of a sudden they started doing much more outreach, much more community stuff. The other thing that had forced them to change was the nature of their sponsorships, because they were all over the map and kind of didn't have a good sponsorship strategy. And they used the Grunig relationship study to find the localities of people who trusted them the least. So they focused on sponsorships in those areas. The demographics of the people who trusted them the least. I mean, this is where, you always learn more from failure than from success. So the first thing you do is find out where your relationship is awful and focus on that and see what you can do to turn it around. So it was both the demographics and the geographics, the physical locations, where they needed the most help, and then they would go in and they had focused very specifically on a couple of key areas in the state, and were pretty effective. The upside downside was that at the same time they were also lobbying very hard, which came out in the press and, probably, lowered the trust level a little bit. But I mean, for the most part, that's me. I'm an informed consumer, whereas most people just, I think, were incredibly grateful that, here's this enormous company coming in to help the local Little League that never had any help before. But it did, obviously they were using the data to measure and improve the relationships. The other classic one is that, the town of Durham, where I live, lost. It's a long story. If you read my book, it's in there. But they did not measure relationships. They got into a fight with the town. The end of the result was that the university president lost her job, and they had to give a $6 million donation back to the donor because they couldn't do what they wanted to do. And ever since then, the town and the university have worked together to do an annual survey of residents of Durham to find out exactly how they feel every year. So, it's a little, closing the barn after the horse has already left, but in fact, relationships in town are much better because they have the research. And people aren't, the pitchforks at the gate. There's a very interesting TED Talk, if you ever hear it. I can't remember. It's some very successful entrepreneur that basically argues as to why, successful companies with rich CEOs should be huge philanthropists. And focus on community relationships, because he said, otherwise it's, the pitchforks, they're going to be at the gate with pitchforks. And I think to a certain extent you're seeing that in the political realm, that social media and so the general mood is enabling people to express their anger and add bad relationships. So I think more than ever it's a really important thing to be measuring. If that gives you, Sean, I'm giving you an argument for why it needs to be part of it, I guess.
Katie, this is Claire. I have another question.
Yes.
It sounds like, based off of this, that is there any insight into whether just the act of measuring a relationship improves relationship, the fact that you're approaching stakeholders?
Yeah, I would argue it probably does. I mean, most of the data does say that the act of asking questions does impact the people of whom you are asking questions. And I don't know. I don't have any data to support that. I do know that when we did a relationship study and a big survey up in the North Country when we first moved up there, and we got a 40% response rate because nobody had ever asked them a question before, and they were so grateful that anybody cared about their opinion. The reverse of that however, is that if you ask them a question and nothing changes, that will worsen the relationship. The local public television station had that problem with employee surveys, and they kept asking employees these surveys, and nothing ever changed. And morale kept going down every time they did another survey because they didn't see the results. So one of the things you got to remember is if you do a survey, you got to show results, and you got to kind of change things as a result. You got to say that not just that I want your opinion, but you have to express the fact that, oh, I've heard your opinion, and now I'm going to do something about it. So that's the big, that's the factor.
As a follow-up, is there any difference, again, if there is insight into whether, you know, it's different if it's a third-party survey that's helping you get past the paywall? Does that elicit a bit of a negative response, or does it help if it's?
I think, first of all, I think third-party, for the most part, I think people trust third-party surveys more. You know, I'm a big advocate for don't ever, I mean, other than small internal surveys where, you know, everybody knows it's coming from you, but I'm a big advocate of third party because I think that people tend to be more honest.
Good. Thank you.
The interesting thing is up in the North Country, nobody had ever, this was when I was running Katie Penn and Partners, but nobody ever heard of Katie Penn and Partners. They might have heard of me, but we were worried about that. We were very worried that nobody would know who or what we were and nobody would respond. This was a mail survey. Here's an interesting one that Sean might take a tip from, but it was a mail survey. It was distributed in February in northern New Hampshire. Not a whole lot of other things to do unless you're out there riding around on a snowmobile or ice fishing. So we didn't just get 40% response rates. We had an open area for questions. We had people write 10 pages of verbatim responses on everything that was going on. And it was amazing to hear what people had to say. And I think that they were possibly more forthcoming simply because this didn't come from any known entity. This was just somebody who wanted their opinion. Can't prove that, but it was extraordinary.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think the ability to gather this kind of data today, I mean, as I said, the looking at social media for relationship aspects, one of the things that would work, so for instance, it would work for Save the Children because you have sufficient amount of conversations to make it work. If you don't have a lot of social media conversations about the contained emotions of some sort or some expression of feelings, it's a lot harder. When we first tried this experiment, what we were looking for was levels of trust, commitment and satisfaction, all that stuff, between three major universities, Stanford, MIT, and Harvard, I believe. The first thing we realized was we had to eliminate sports because Stanford is, huge in sports, MIT is not. So the volume of expressions of all kinds of things was much higher at Stanford. So we took out the sports stuff. Then what we found was there wasn't enough content left that talked about any of the relationship aspects because people just don't say, I trust Stanford, right? They might say I fell in love at Stanford, but they don't necessarily say, I love my physics course or I trust my physics professor. There just wasn't enough conversation to actually make it valid. To look at it from certainly not from an automated standpoint. We eventually found about 200, 300 stories that we could actually code for the trust aspects of it, but it needed a lot of work. We've gotten better at refining the coding. One of the big things is you have to be really clear about your coding document, your instructions for coding if you're going to look for trust elements. And we learned a lot that first time where you really had to look at the content very carefully and with very rigid rules as to what constituted trust and commitment satisfaction.
Oh, well, I hate to be the time cop, but it is 1 p.m. So thank you guys for participating. This was another great measurement hour. Any last words for everyone today, Katie?
No, just thank you to everybody. Enjoy the what's left of February, the love month. I think it's very funny. Everybody's saying talking about relationships and love in the month of February. And we hope to see you again next month when we'll probably be talking about. I'm gonna preview this a little bit. I haven't talked to Erin about it, but I think we'll probably do the how-to session. So bring your how-to questions. We'll see what we can do to answer them. In the meantime, have a great rest of your week.